Welcome to the Canadian Business Quarterly podcast, where we speak with Canada's most influential industry leaders on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all of our content, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.
Today we're joined by Steve Baker, Principal, Founder, and CEO of Virtual High School. Steve's background was as a biology and chemistry teacher for 32 years across 4 high schools in 2 different provinces. He founded Virtual High School in 1995 with a single biology course. Today it has 72 different courses and 100 teachers serving over 8,000 students from all over the world. 7 years ago, they were operating out of the basement of Steve's home, and today they have 75 full-time administrators, content developers, instructional designers, and multimedia developers in a converted hotel on the main street of Bayfield, Ontario. Steve's core belief is that the handling of students in batches is heading towards extinction thanks to the Internet's ability to liberate each student's start date and pace through the course. As a pioneer of online learning in Canada, Steve continues to lead Virtual High School's efforts to build high-quality and engaging course content and operating a school that is tailored to the student. Steve, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Jess. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So tell me, what was the original spark that gave you the idea to start up Virtual High School?
Well, I spent a year in jail in Blue Water Secondary School. I was a teacher there. And it was a school for young offenders. And these young offenders would come into the institution, come into class, and then they could be pulled out for 2 or 3 weeks and sent off to a court case in some other part of Ontario and then return. And so we had to have our courses designed such that they could pick it up at any point in time. And for me, that was a new and innovative idea about online, or not online, because there was very little in those days. It was about curriculum and schooling, that it doesn't have to be in a linear manner. It can be punctuated. So that's where it started from.
Okay. And what time period are we talking about?
That would have been when I moved to Ontario. That would have been 1987.
So you're talking about this now, but this gave you the idea. So can you explain how this actually developed into a business?
Okay. Well, that will be a number of steps there. And then from that year at Blue Water Secondary School, I went over, the school board put me underneath a grandstand at a racetrack, and I was to run an alternative school there. So whenever they had students that didn't fit into the normal bricks and mortar school, they would send them over to me.
Okay.
And I was responsible for their education. And again, their attendance was sporadic. So that concept of the progression through the course and not being in a nice, neat, okay, everybody's in the class, I can now teach the 30 kids and I'll teach a different lesson tomorrow. That went out the window again underneath that grandstand building. And for 3 years, that happened. And so eventually I found myself back into what we consider to be a regular bricks and mortar classroom. But those ideas still stayed with me. And from there, I guess the progression to the online school would be years ahead.
And so for myself, I guess what I'm trying to understand and ask of you is, how did you go from a teacher to a business owner? You know, what were those steps that took you into that environment?
Well, they were all mini steps. It certainly wasn't my intention to be a business owner. I was like you indicated in your introduction, I was a chemistry and biology teacher, and business was the last thing from my mind. But when we wrote our first course in 95, was a biology course. It was written because the principal told me, sorry, Steve, no more new textbooks. So you got to deal with these old textbooks that were written back in the 1950s. So it was at that point in 95 that we decided, okay, the internet is new. I've learned the HTML language. Why don't I work with my class and we'll put the content online? And that was kind of the start of the progression to the online world. But the business aspect was years down the road. Up to this point, it was just a love of teaching and desire to make sure that the students had the best information available to them, and of course the internet afforded that.
So as you were transitioning into being a business and developing that, it's always a bit daunting to take that step. What concerns did you have originally when you created the brand Virtual High School?
Well, I remember I had to buy a domain, and when I went to search out at Network Solutions, a lot of this was in 97, early 97, like January, and a lot of the good names like school.com, they were all gone, classroom.com. So I had I need the name of school, and I have to purchase a domain for that. And so at the time, virtual reality was all the rage and in the media. So I just chose the name Virtual High School and bought that domain, and there was no real planning. It was just seemed like it was the last domain left that I could purchase. So funny how that sometimes, and we worked on branding the name Virtual High School a fair amount, but that was really what happened there. It was just as simple. There was nothing else left, and that was the only one I could choose.
So you buy the domain, and what's the process of, I guess, effectively, going through business development and monetizing that? Were you actively talking to schools about why they should use you, or where did you start to develop this growth from?
Well, Jess, in those days, in 97, I was still working with the school board. So I was teaching in the class, and I was just doing this on the side. And the school board was a partner with us. So in a way, the school board was looking after all of the financial requirements. But it turned out that when I bought the domain Virtual High School, I charged it to my own credit card, and I didn't submit the receipt to the school board. So here I am sitting with this, and a lot of teachers do that, of course. And then when we eventually broke up with the school board in the year 2000, the school board decided to do it differently than we had been doing it for the past 5 years. I was able to keep that Virtual High School domain by the fact that I had not submitted the expense. If I had submitted that $52 expense, right, who knows, right? Sure. What could have happened? I mean, Virtual High School may not even be in existence, or it may have come under a different name at the very least.
What an overbearing expense to take on, $52, say.
I know.
So, this is, before, for the people listening, we always have a chat to our interviewees. They understand the questions that we're going to ask, and it's effectively a formal chat. And when we were originally speaking, I remember you telling me that in the year 2000, you effectively broke with the Ontario School Board and moved to a private education model. So you were talking about how you were working with the school system. Can you explain the difference and also what facilitated that change?
Yeah, that was a tough period of in the business, really, because we had been working for 5 years, developing a number of courses, working out the model for doing an online course. And then in 2000, there was a change in leadership at the school board, and they decided that they were going to do things differently and that I was out. And that's a decision they certainly have a right to make. And so I then was left with a domain and a concept, and the school board at the time was moving towards CDs, and I thought that was the wrong way to go. So anyway, I decided to keep it alive. But of course, the key thing there, Jess, is I had no longer had the ability to offer credits. Right. So here I had a school with a couple of courses and no credit granting ability. My daughter said, "Dad, why don't you become private?" And so I proceeded down that line, and we had an inspection done by the Ministry of Education here in Ontario, and they basically granted us the right to act as a private school. And of course, our 2 courses that we had at that time were all online, and that was our start, and that would have been around 2001 that they granted us that.
And we spoke about this briefly, going back a few weeks ago, but can you just break down what is the difference, or when you go private, what does that mean? Is there a difference in the curriculum? How is that standardized? These sorts of things.
Well, the ministry sets all of the standards that are required of private schools, and the curriculum is exactly the same, and that's what they try to ensure, that all private schools are offering the same courses so that a credit received at a private school in grade 10 history is exactly the same as the credit that the student would have gotten and the education that the student would have gotten in a public school. So their goal is to inspect us and to make sure that we follow all of their procedures for report cards, assessment and evaluation, transcripts, OSRs, that they are to the level that they expect them to be for any school. They inspect public schools as well.
Okay. So a lot of the people that will be listening to us will be from across the country and probably even some international listeners. Could you provide some insights on what are the issues and concerns currently within the Ontario School Board at the moment in the education sector?
Well, when students come from other provinces, and about 10% of our students do come from other Canadian provinces, and about 10% come from international jurisdictions. The first thing we have to do is determine if they have the prerequisite for the course or courses that they've signed up for. And for most Canadian education is similar across all provinces. But when we come, with 180 plus countries in this world now, there's a lot of documentation in different languages that we have to delve into and to determine if they have completed that prerequisite. So that was one of the first things that we had to do, was to determine these equivalencies for these courses. And once the student was determined to have the equivalent of the prerequisite, we could then allow them to enter the course and proceed into their grade 11 biology, because they had a grade 10 science or its equivalent. So that's one of the most difficult tasks that we have, and we still do, how to delve into all of these documents that these students bring.
So you had said that originally, going back to 95, I think you said it was a biology course that you started. So what is the scope of what you offer today?
Well, today we offer there's 72 or 73 courses from grades 9 to 12. So we offer, a student in a typical high school in Ontario would probably offer 55 or 60. So we probably have a greater selection of courses that students can choose from. And they would cross all barriers. And we expect, of course, English and science and math. But a lot of people don't realize that we offer courses like phys ed and music and art, and we do these online. And they find that absolutely incredulous that we can offer these types of courses in an online environment. And the ministry comes in and inspects us and makes sure that we are doing it properly. And it's amazing how it's allowed us to be creative and to think about doing things differently. We're not standing in front of a classroom. We have to do things a little bit differently, and we have to present that teaching differently. So that's been the fun part, designing how to offer these courses in a way that they haven't been offered before. And we don't have a lot of blazed trails ahead of us.
How does that work in a virtual environment? How do I register for phys ed, and how do you monitor whether or not I'm actually playing football or not, or the like?
Well, what we do, first of all, phys ed now is no longer just going into the gymnasium and playing dodgeball. Phys ed is a very complex course and music and art. These are very complex courses with a lot of theory. So, for example, sexual education is a part of the physical education course. And that is something that can be delivered in a manner that the internet is quite capable of doing. When we get to the physical activity component, then that's where we have to involve the student's community. So there has to be, the teacher's still going to do all the assessing and evaluating, but there has to be somebody from the community that the student chooses to help monitor the student and then communicate with the teacher so that the teacher can do the assessing and the evaluating of the acquiring of the expectation, curriculum expectation.
Okay. And so what do you think makes you most attractive to prospective students? And I assume parents are part of this discussion as well.
Well, we don't do a whole lot of advertising. And so a lot of our awareness of virtual high school comes from people talking to other people. And so what we've really tried to focus on is teaching the topics well. Now, is there room for improvement? Yes. We're constantly upgrading. Our courses are what I would consider to be a spiral. They're never completed, and we sort of put them in and we can pull them out like a little tray. They're constantly undergoing development almost on a daily basis. Yes, a student sometimes will suggest to us something. I didn't understand this, and then we will go in and we'll edit the content slightly so that the next student doesn't have the same negative experience. So these things are constantly evolving and growing. And again, that's a part of the excitement of this new business that we have is trying to devise new ways to present this, curriculum that students can move through at their own pace. And that's what they find attractive, is the fact that they can start anytime and move through at their own pace. And whether that's slow, in some cases, some students need it to be delivered in a slow manner so that they can absorb it, whereas other students, they're through in half the time that you would normally expect.
And so what sort of business lessons have you learned then? I mean, because you've gone through, like when you talk about the mid-90s, I remember this being, you connect your modem through a fax machine, you get that whizzing sound, you have the Angel Fire websites. There must be a lot of learnings from that point to where we are today.
Oh, yeah, the old WSFTP, sending your files to the server and waiting for them so you could see them. I used to tell the story where I was in great shape. I used to do push-ups while I waited for the files to upload.
Right. Okay.
So those were good. Those were the good old days. Today is everything is instantaneous and a lot more polished and smooth I've really forgotten the question there, Jeff.
I was just asking, what business lessons have you learned?
Okay, so one of the key things that we've learned as a business as we've grown is, and originally it was all within me, the owner and the founder and the creator. And then as I added more and more staff, my role was to divest myself of my responsibilities. And that's tough to do. And then because you always feel that nobody knows it as well as you do. And then, of course, as the business continues to grow, the staff that you've hired now have to divest themselves relinquish those responsibilities that they have. And coaching them and making them realize that in order for us to grow, we have to give away the things that we're currently doing, and we have to do things that nobody else can do. And that was one of the biggest lessons that both I and my staff have had to learn is with respect to running a business.
Okay. So how do you try to, it's pretty standardized courses. So how do you try to innovate on teaching and education methods?
Well, this is a visual world. It's not slabs of text. So our writing, yes, is very important. Our content, our text is very important. But what we've learned now, we have a staff of 8 graphic artists and animators and video artists. So a lot of the teaching that would normally go on in a classroom with the teacher animating or with slides or videos, we now make little short videos and animations to place into our course so that the student can interact with that content rather than just be a passive receptor of the content. So that's one of the big challenges. And of course, it's exciting. We have staff over there making hand puppets because we're writing curriculum also for the K-8 market. And so we have, they're creating hand puppets and they're little videos to teach them how to make change and so on and so forth. So staff absolutely love this creative component rather than just writing text.
Now, you've when we've been talking about expansion, you'd mentioned previously that you're now working in the elementary sector as well as taking on some contracts for courses in the U.S. market. I think it was Florida, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us about how this has developed and how these opportunities have arisen for you?
Well, you're right. A couple of years ago, Florida Virtual School, which is the online school for the state of Florida, released an RFP in which they wanted 36 courses in grades K to 5 written and developed. And so we, in our risk, we don't have an aversion to taking risks. So we said, sure, let's apply to the RFP. So we had 2 weeks, and we created this response, which was about 100 pages. And we had to provide examples of our work, et cetera. And we sent it down to Florida, and they invited us to come down and make a presentation along with other responders from the United States. I think we were the only Canadian responder. So anyway, to make a long story short, ultimately they gave all 36 courses to us. And then for the past 2 years, we had to hire a lot of new staff. We had to hire 70 staff. And for rural Ontario, that has its challenges, but we had no problem meeting that. And we had 18 months then to complete the 36 courses in K to 5, of which we had never written a single course before. We always focused on the high school end of it. So that was quite a challenge. And we carried it off. It went to completion. It's just finishing off. And from all I can hear from my staff is that the people at Florida Virtual School are very pleased with the product that we produced. It was a huge undertaking. I think we need a year's break now before we tackle anything else. But no, it was a great learning experience, and we've learned a lot about about contracts, about responsibilities. And Florida, we're they're a big school with 1,900 employees, and they were very demanding of us, and we had to learn to set up our teams properly and create efficiencies in communication. And we started using different software to facilitate all of the tasks that go into these 36 courses. So it was a great learning experience for our business.
How it's very interesting to me specifically because as we both know, Canada is not it's not really on the radar of the U.S. So to be able to get a win like that, are there any particular factors that you think of why they opted to choose a Canadian provider for this?
Well, I'm sure Ontario and the other provinces in Canada are feel that they're doing a great job with respect to their education. I mean, Canada quite often finishes near the top in international competitions, though there is some doubt now about the way some provinces are actually teaching mathematics. But for the most part, Ontario and Canada's education has been highly viewed in the world. And I'm sure Florida, when they did look at us from Canada, were aware of that fact. And so I think, we may be standing on the shoulders of others that had come before us and established a good credibility in the market. So I think that was certainly one of the key factors.
Are there large discrepancies between, Florida state education and Ontario provincial education in these years?
Well, there's some, Jess. We've learned a lot. Obviously, their standards are slightly different than the standards that Ontario would set for its primary and elementary schools and grades. But we learned a lot from them about different aspects and trying to accessibility, for example. Was very high on their radar, and there was learning going on in both directions, and we're a smarter company now as a result of working on that huge contract with Florida.
Okay. Steve, we're about to wrap up our conversation for today, but before we do, is there anything else that you'd like to, make mention of or talk about what's happening within your organization?
Jess, I don't know. We're just like a lot of startups, right? by the founder. I mean, I was the founder of it in the startup. We're hopefully growing to the point where I can leave and that the business can then run on its own without me having to be around. I feel confident in that I can do that. I think we have a great staff. We live in rural Ontario. We're an hour away from the big cities, and yet we have no problem in attracting staff to our growing business. And I think that's part of the reason why we are attracting them, is that millennials today don't want to spend time in the big cities. They've been there for 4 or 5 years going to university, and they want to go back to a more normal existence. So that's certainly one of the reasons. The other reason why we're successful, if that can be a word that applied to us, is, well, I'm really falling off the chair here now, Jess. I'm drawing a blank.
That's all right.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right. But it sounds like it's going well, and you're now sort of at the opportunity to maybe move back a little bit from the business, which is, a lot of the people that we speak to sort of endeavor to be able to get to that point. So it sounds like it's growing, and the success is there, and the fact that there's so many Canadian companies that desperately wish for the opportunity to crack the U.S. market, and it sounds like you are well on your way to doing that.
Yeah, I don't know how it happened. It was just like a luck. But I think in behind the scenes, and Florida recognized this, in behind the scenes, what we did was always focus on producing quality material for our own students. And when they saw the samples that we were using at Virtual High School, then they said, okay, we like this. This looks to be good high-end thought and planning gone into these courses. It's not just cobbled together from a bunch of individual pieces. I think they recognized the threads that we were weaving through our courses, and that's why they invited us down to present, and ultimately that's why they granted us that large contract.
Look, that's a really good note to finish off on today, I think. Steve Baker is the founder and CEO of Virtual High School. Steve, thanks for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much, Jess. It's been nice talking to you as well.
You as well. Cheers.
This has been a production of the Canadian Business Quarterly, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Canadian Business Quarterly, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.